All right, so kidney physiology, how it all works. Okay, so we've touched upon a few of these aspects already. We've talked about the anatomy, microscopic and macroscopic. Okay, macroscopic is so easy. Okay, the kidneys, ureter, bladder, urethra. Microscopic, talking about the nephron and all the different parts of the nephron. Now talking about the function of the kidneys, which we've touched upon a lot of this. This number is incorrect, I'm sorry. It's 120 milliliters of blood pass through the glomeruli every minute. Okay, 120 milliliters per minute. Kidneys use 20 to 25% of the body's oxygen. That's amazing to me. Glomerular filtration, we talked about. Bringing in blood, filtering it through those glomerular capillaries. Okay. Tubular reabsorption. Tubular reabsorption is when we take substances out of the tubes and send it back to the blood. And once again, we do that through the peritubular capillaries. Secretion would be the creation of urine. Okay, so we've talked about this. We've talked about all this. Glomerular filtration is passive, which means there are no pumps that use ATP or energy. It has a high pressure rate, about 55 millimeters per mercury. Small molecules pass freely. We've touched upon all this, okay? So, how we change the pressure that we haven't talked about. The intrinsic controls. So there are two ways. The JG cells, if pressure drops, so that's what we're focusing on right now. If pressure drops, the JG cells sense that, they will release renin, okay? Renin is a very potent hormone which will convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. This is on the next couple slides, okay? Angiotensin 2 has several ways that it increases blood pressure, okay? So these are controls that if we sense glomerular filtration rate is decreasing, if we sense that blood pressure is decreasing, our kidneys will sort of start to kick in these processes to increase blood pressure. The first step is those JG cells will release renin, okay? And I'll talk about the steps of what renin does in just a minute. The other thing that happens, I'm going to try to draw this big. Here's the glomerulus. Let me see how that looks. Yeah, you can see that. Okay, here's the afferent arteriole. Okay, here's that efferent arteriole. Okay, blood comes in on this side. You can't see that, can you? Here, let me zoom in. Okay. So we've got, sorry, there we go. Blood coming in, blood leaving. Are you with me? Some of you are going, why arterial for both, right? Because an arterial is moving blood away from the heart, okay? And it's not going to the tissues to send oxygen and nutrients to the tissues, it's being filtered, okay? So, you're still moving that blood away from the heart, that's why it's called arterial. It's a little confusing, isn't it? But don't drive yourself nuts, because I won't get into that, okay? But afferent arterial is going to bring blood in, efferent arterial takes blood out. Now, our body, our kidneys sense that blood pressure is decreasing. It releases renin. That's the first step. Renin is gone. It's going to increase blood pressure. Right at the kidneys, though, what can happen is this afferent arteriole will actually open. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but I'll give you a mental picture. This efferent arteriole will become smaller. So you could see you let more blood in, you let less blood out. You're giving the glomerulus more time to filter more substances out. That sort of makes up for the lack of pressure. It slows down the blood flow going through the glomerulus, so there's more time to filter substances out. So blood pressure drops, renin is released. Before renin can actually kick in and do its job, an immediate response in the kidney to help increase filtration rate is to open up the arteriole that lets blood in, close up the arteriole that lets blood out, let blood filter out of the glomerulus. okay? Extrinsic controls would be a stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system. Now, if you go back, sympathetic, parasympathetic, sympathetic is fight or flight, okay? In a fight or flight situation, we will increase mean blood pressure, okay? Mean arterial pressure or overall blood pressure, okay? We'll increase that blood pressure because we'll have blood flowing through the body more quickly so we can bring oxygen to the tissues more quickly because we'll be in a higher metabolic state. If blood pressure drops, your body will sense it. It will stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nerves cause constriction of all the blood vessels in the body, which will increase blood pressure, okay, overall. Okay, so intrinsic controls, renin, and the change of the arterial shape. Sympathetic control will be an extrinsic mechanism, which increases overall body blood pressure, excuse me. Okay. Renin-Angiotensin Mechanism, this is the next slide. So we know renin is going to come from those JG cells or juxtaglomerular cells, okay? Renin is then released into the bloodstream. Renin is then released into the bloodstream, okay? Renin will turn angiotensin 1 into angiotensin, I'm going to abbreviate it because I'm running out of room, but angiotensin 2. Okay, renin causes this to happen. Okay. Now, how this happens, so renin starts this process of turning 1 into 2. How this really happens is through a process or through an enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme. Okay, bread and butter stuff. Can you read that? Okay, good. ACE inhibitor. Aha! People with high blood pressure and heart problems take ACE inhibitors. Okay? ACE inhibitors prevent the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 1 is the latent form. It's not the active form. Angiotensin 2 is. Angiotensin 2, you could see under your notes. Angiotensin 2 is a very potent vasoconstrictor. If we constrict all those blood vessels, just like the hose analogy. You're out in the summer, your brother's ticking you off, your sister's ticking you off, you've got the hose, you're watering your mom's flowers, you want to spray them, you cover the end of the hose and whammo, right? You're increasing the pressure in that hose because you're decreasing the diameter. Vasoconstriction is a decrease of the diameter of blood vessels, which will increase systemic blood pressure. Okay? Angiotensin 2 also helps the reabsorption of sodium. Where sodium goes, water goes. If we reabsorb sodium into the body, water will follow it. Increases plasma volume, will increase blood pressure. Antidiuretic hormone. Okay, dig deep. Antidiuretic hormone. ADH, may more ring a bell. Comes from the posterior pituitary, ADH. Antidiuresis, against diuresis, antidiuretic hormone will prevent the dumping of water into urine. Antidiuretic hormone will stop water from going into the urine. It'll bring water back into the body, put it into the bloodstream, which will increase blood pressure. Okay, thirst. You get thirsty, you get really thirsty. Those thirst centers actually in the hypothalamus of the brain. Okay, hypothalamus is one of the major thirst regulators of the body, or the major thirst regulator of the body. Thirst is important to tell our body you're low on fluids. You got to get more fluids, increase fluid, that'll increase the amount of volume. Release of aldosterone. Okay, so angiotensin 2 will stimulate the release of aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. Aldosterone also contributes to vasoconstriction. Well, I'm sorry, no, to the retention of sodium. Okay, to the retention of sodium. If we retain sodium, we're going to retain water. Okay, so multiples. So obviously, blood pressure is super important, right? If we have all these mechanisms in place to increase blood pressure, The maintenance of blood pressure is very important. If blood pressure drops, you're not going to perfuse the tissues of the body properly. That perfusion means to push fluids into them, simply put, okay? So renin-angiotensin. Tubular reabsorption, let me zoom back out. So there, okay? So different areas of the tube that we talked about are going to reabsorb different structures or different substances, okay? The real big structures, glucose, amino acids, proteins, are going to be reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. Glucose should not be dumped into the urine, okay? Glucose should not. It should be totally reabsorbed. Red blood cells should not be in the urine, okay? Proteins should not be in the urine. We should reabsorb those. A lot of that reabsorption will happen in the proximal convoluted tubule, okay? Non-reabsorbed or poorly reabsorbed urea, okay? Urea is a byproduct of protein metabolism. We want to get rid of urea, okay? Urea is actually going to come from the breakdown of proteins. We break down proteins, we create nitrogen and free amino acids. Nitrogen is turned into ammonia. We don't like ammonia in the body, it's very bad. That ammonia will be turned into uric acid or urea that's excreted by the urine, okay? Creatinine. Creatinine is actually totally filtered by the kidneys. It's used to check the filtration rate, the glomerular filtration rate of the kidneys. Okay, so if you're given a certain amount of creatinine, it should be 100% excreted in the urine. Okay, so these substances should be not reabsorbed into the bloodstream, should be sent out into the urine. Okay, tubular secretion. Here is the acid base that I talked to you about. Okay, here is the acid base. Turn on the old thinking caps. I know this is kind of a tough lecture. This is important, very clinical stuff. Okay, if you hear a clinician talk about metabolic acidosis, they're probably referencing the kidneys. Okay. The two substances that I want you to know about is bicarbonate. Okay, you can see HCO3 negative, that's a negative ion. HCO3 negative is a bicarbonate ion. HCO3 negative is a bicarbonate ion. That is basic. So HCO3 negative bicarb, that is basic. That is going to make us more alkaline. H plus is a hydrogen ion. Hydrogen ions are acidic. Hydrogen ions are acidic. So we've got one or the other. We actually have both in the kidney. I'm sorry. We have both in the kidney. Okay. I want you to think for a minute. Those are the two that I want you to worry about, by the way. Don't worry about potassium and chloride, or chloride. I'm sorry. If your body is acidic, would we want to keep or get rid of hydrogen ions? Your body's acidic, it's too acidic, okay? You're going to get rid of hydrogen ions. On the opposite hand, we're going to keep bicarbonate, aren't we? Because bicarbonate is basic, it can help to buffer the acidity. So these are going to work antagonistically, okay? So hydrogen ions would be gotten rid of, bicarbonate ions would be kept. If you're too basic, if you are too basic, you would want to keep or get rid of bicarbonate ions. You would want to get rid of bicarbonate and retain hydrogen, okay, to buffer those. Okay, so these are going to work antagonistically. If you are talking about the overall acid base of the body, the kidney can compensate for it. Okay, the kidney can compensate for it. So there's a give and a take, and your kidney's constantly monitoring the pH of the body and determining what it should be getting rid of or keeping, okay? A lot of this is going to happen at the distal convoluted tubule, by the way. Okay, water leaves a descending limb. It does indeed. What I want you to really know is the collecting ducts is going to be the major area that's going to be for the reabsorption of water, okay? So this is great. If you want to learn this slide, you can. I want you to focus on the next area, okay? Dilute versus concentrated urine. What can change that is either adding water to the urine or taking water out, okay? So if we have a concentrated urine, just think for a minute. If we have a concentrated urine, we're going to be taking water out of that tubular system and putting it back into the bloodstream. If we have a dilute urine, you chug a huge thing of water on your way to school, you're going to dump some of that water through the kidneys, you're going to have a dilute urine, okay? Don't forget that urine is not 100% water, it's 95% water. It's going to be 5% other substances, urea, creatinine, sodium, hydrogen, bicarbonate, all those different things that we talked about. So that concentration or dilution is going to be dependent upon how much water you're adding or taking away from the urine, okay? One of the major areas that you're going to reabsorb water from is going to be the collecting duct. Let me see. Okay. So that whole tubular system, we go through proximal convoluted tubule, Leukopenly, blah, 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 blah. We get to that last part of the tube. I had it drawn over here. It was a collecting duct, okay? The collecting duct. The collecting duct is going to be that last part of the tube of the nephron, that microscopic filtration part of the kidney, okay? It's made up of cells. It's made up of a simple cuboidal. You don't need to know that, but you can imagine the cells lining the inside of that tube, okay? There's a substance, this is on your slide, that is released. So if we sense that we're becoming dehydrated, our posterior pituitary will release antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone will travel through the bloodstream and go to the kidney, and it will release a substance near this collecting duct called aquaporin. I always remembered it. It seems simple to me because aqua, like agua, porin, pouring in, or pouring out, I should say. Aquaporin will open up spaces in this collecting duct through which water can leave. This is a good mechanism for water retention. And that water is going to go into those peritubular capillaries, which go back into the bloodstream. So we retain that water. Antidiuresis is going to prevent water from going into the urine. It's going to retain water into the bloodstream. We're going to get a more concentrated urine, okay? Aquaporin. Diuretics are going to stop the reabsorption of sodium. If we stop the reabsorption of sodium, where sodium goes, water goes. We stop the retention of water. We'll get rid of sodium. We'll get rid of water. We get decrease in the volume of blood in the body, or fluids in the body. So diuretics are important for people with high blood pressure, people who have congestive heart failure, people who have edema or swelling. Okay, so diuretics are going to dump sodium and thereby dump water. Okay. Urine. So I'm going to just zoom in on the slide itself. I think I'm going to zip through this because I think a lot of this is commonsensical. Okay, color and transparency, you get a lot of this in clinical too. So hemoglobin can make it, can make urine. This is a normal breakdown of red blood cells. Okay, it gives it that yellowish color. If it's cloudy, there could be a UTI. Should have an ammonia odor. Your kids leave the pee in the toilet, it starts to smell a little bit like ammonia because of the breakdown of those biochemical structures. pH should be about 6, and specific gravity. Specific gravity is like the osmolarity of that urine. Distilled water is water that's been boiled and has no substances or solutes in it. Okay, so distilled waters are earmarked for this. Distilled water is 1.0. Urine's specific gravity compared to distilled water is 1.001 to 1.035. So there's a small amount of solute in there. I think it's about 5%. Excuse me. Or it is 5%. So chemical composition, water is 95%, 5% urea, uric acid, creatinine. Okay. And we don't want to see blood, white blood cells, proteins, glucose, etc. Okay. Ketone bodies. I'll get into this in a little bit. In another lecture. Ketone bodies are the byproduct of fat breakdown. Okay. Ketone bodies. We'll get into that in a little bit. Ureters, bladder, urethra. Oops, Yep, okay. Urine from the renal pelvis goes to the bladder by the ureters. Those ureters actually will come up on the underside, so they go down and underneath the bladder. Transitional epithelium is the epithelium lining the inside of the ureters and the bladder. Kidney stone is very painful if anybody's ever had one. Case of culmination of calcium that's build up a little stone that can lodge in the kidneys, and it can cause flank or side pain. Okay. The urinary bladder is a muscular sac that has folds called rugae in it, just like the stomach. Remember the rugae of the stomach, or those folds? Those folds allow the bladder to stretch, to shrink, to stretch, to shrink, to stretch, to shrink, you know, however many times a day you go to the bathroom. About 200 milliliters, your bladder starts to say, hey, wait a second, I have to go. 500 says, I really have to go. It's almost impossible to get 1,000 milliliters, okay? The bladder may burst. At that point, you will urinate, though. You will uncontrollably lose control of your bladder at that point, okay? The trigone. So the ureters, let me come back out here. So the ureters come down from the kidney, and what happens if this is the bladder? The ureters come underneath on the back side. There's a little flap of a mucous membrane that covers them. So that way urine can come up and gets trapped in the bladder, and it can't go back up that tube. It's really a brilliant design. If you can imagine that these are the openings of the ureter, sitting in front is the opening for the urethra, okay? So that triangular shape, and this is in your notes under urinary bladder, is known as the trigone, okay? It's the bottom of the bladder where you've got that triangular shape between the ureters and the urethra, okay? There's an internal urethral sphincter and an external. The external is skeletal muscle, so we have control over it. We also have a bladder, a U-shaped pelvic basin of muscle that helps to support the bladder. It causes a little bit of a constriction around the urethra, and it also causes support, or provides support for the bladder and the uterus. This is the area that they talk about when they talk about Kegel muscles, or if you do Pilates, they talk about contracting the bottom floor of your pelvic basin. You're working that bladder of muscle, or that it's almost like a diaphragm, and that helps to support the bladder. It helps to support the uterus. It helps to provide better control of the bladder, and it also prevents prolapse, which is dropping of the uterus or the bladder, and that can happen in males or females, not the uterus, obviously. I've been teaching this long enough to know the difference. The dropping of the bladder, okay? Micturition is the next slide, is urination. That is parasympathetic, okay? I went through those numbers already, okay? Usually after you urinate, you have about 10 milliliters left, okay? Development of the kidneys. They begin low and actually move in the embryo up until they get into their final position, the lower aspect of the rib cage. Some people actually have a horseshoe kidney, which is when both kidneys are connected right across. It looks like a horseshoe. Quite often they have no problems. They have no physiological problems with their functioning of their kidneys. What happens is they'll have some sort of abdominal distress, some sort of back pain. They'll go for an MRI and they find it, okay? So these people usually have no problem. Hypospadias. Okay, we get to start talking about the fun stuff. Hypospadias is on a male's penis when the opening is not on the front, it's on the underside. Okay, hypo, below, spadias, you know, the opening or the tip of the penis. So instead of the opening being on the tip, it's on the underside, which obviously causes difficulty with urination. Okay, and I believe that there can be more opportunities for infections as well. Polycystic kidney, there are two forms. There's congenital and adult. Congenital polycystic kidney can really be a problem. There can be multiple cysts in that child's kidney. Usually it's a child. And what happens is the cysts destroy the nice healthy kidney tissue. Now they don't have enough kidney tissue to filter the blood. Okay, this will often require a transplant. Adult polycystic kidney is much slower growing, usually doesn't cause quite as many complications. I mean, of course it can if it progresses far enough, but it's much slower, may need a transplant, may not, depending on the condition, okay, and their glomerular filtration rate, okay. So that was a big chunk of change lecture. If you have any questions whatsoever, absolutely send me an email. If not, I will see you in lab. Thanks so much and have a great day.